What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and let's talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi Episode 4. Honestly, I really enjoyed this episode, and here's the thing. I gotta say, I just want to throw this out there, because when the show first launched, when it first came out, the big question everybody had, and I was really one of those people, is when are we going to get the fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader? And in the last video that we did, we talked about, at least my thoughts on the fight between the two of them, how I viewed it, and whether or not it was a good fight, a bad fight, what it represented, highlighted, its shortcomings, different things like that. But what I want to kind of talk about here is this kind of continuation, bit of a discussion on Darth Vader, along with the rest of the show. Because the reality is, once Vader appeared in Episode 3, at least the third episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, it was kind of one of those things where like the cat's out of the bag, right? Like we have to start seeing more of Darth Vader, otherwise fans will be disappointed. And I love the way they handled that. And I think that that's really a larger discussion on how Disney has handled Darth Vader. I know a lot of people are on the fence, and a lot of people, at least really, really hardcore Star Wars fans, are very much just disenchanted with Disney's handling of Star Wars, at least in the movies anyway. A lot of people really enjoyed Rebels, different things like that, and that's fair. But one thing that I think no one can deny is how Disney has handled Darth Vader, that no one can really take that away. No one could look at how Disney's handled Darth Vader and say, yeah, man, they really screwed the pooch on that. Not at all, right? And I think the best way to sum this up, it was actually a comment on a YouTube video that I saw, which made the case that Disney had captured Darth Vader as this almost larger-than-life, imposing dark figure, right? What made Darth Vader so captivating when Star Wars first came out and really just captured the imaginations of people, I would even go as far as to say, until we got to episodes 1, 2, and 3, really episode 3 more than anything else, was the mystery and intrigue behind him. We knew he had a backstory, but we never knew how he became Darth Vader. Now granted, episodes 1, 2, and 3 is just a trilogy that is really just the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. But as far as like when Vader became Vader, right? So like the black suit and the breathing and all that kind of stuff, it's iconic. And that as Darth Vader, Anakin was more imposing than he was when he was just regular Anakin. So it's like this force of nature. It's kind of how you see Darth Vader. When he shows up, things are really about to pop off. And so I think Disney's handled that perfectly, and I think they've done it great in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, my thoughts on the whole fight and everything in episode 3 was like, well, I mean, it was designed to highlight just how far these two had fallen in terms of power, right? Darth Vader is nowhere near as powerful as he was as Anakin Skywalker regarding his use of the Force and his lightsaber abilities and so on and so forth. And Obi-Wan Kenobi does not have the same connection to the Force that he used to, right? So literally, just a couple of relatively old guys who just aren't as powerful as they were, trying to recapture their prime. Obi and Darth are going through a midlife crisis. So the thing behind this, and this is what I think was really great in this episode, is that it didn't focus so heavily on Darth Vader, because there is such a thing as overexposure. Right? Like if Obi-Wan Kenobi had like one part, this story about Reva basically trying to prove her worth for whatever reason that hasn't necessarily been explained yet, and then they bring Darth Vader in episode 3 and suddenly it's all about him, then you lose the pacing of the show. Like people are like, is it about Reva, or is it about Obi-Wan, or is it about Darth Vader? Is it about all three? Like, well, what's the whole deal here? I think that having Darth Vader appear sporadically, right? Like only appearing at the very end of this episode to basically chastise Reva and then almost kill her, only for her to realize, or for her to tell us, like, I essentially put a tracking device in their ship, I let them go, that's why I didn't destroy them, kind of showing that sort of espionage, subterfuge element of being an intelligent Sith, somebody that differentiates themselves from like a stormtrooper who shoots and can't even do it accurately versus a high-ranking Sith who would actually think of that, right? Like, let them go, like, let that small fish go, so they'll lead us to the big fish, and then we'll kill them all in one fell swoop. Having him appear in that capacity was great. It was great, because what it does is it shows like Vader's here, man. Like when he shows up, it's not one of those things where it's like, oh cool, Vader's here. Listen, I mean, that's awesome, right? It's one of those, oh damn, dude, Vader's here. Like literally, he just comes walking in, like just pissed. You can just tell by the way he's walking, which that's one of the things that I also want to talk about here for a second. One of the things that I love the most, I have always loved about Darth Vader, in the absence of facial expressions because of the mask on his face, everybody's always had to find other ways to show, to convey how he's feeling. And like through a combination of his walking, his breathing, and the music, right? The kind of tone that they set in the TV show itself, you could tell he was pissed, man. You could tell he was mad as hell. And so when he came walking in, it's just like, oh, damn, dude, this is rough, right? And so it was like, okay, like this, I mean, she's obviously not going to die here. They're not going to kill off a character like that in the 4th episode without giving us any indication of what her backstory is outside of, when I was a little girl, Leia, things were taken from me, and that was basically it. So you knew she was going to survive. I love the way they handled that whole thing. Now, with everything else going on in the show, I still say it's a bit lackluster, right? I do love Reva. I think they're stretching out her story a little too long. I think this episode, when she was talking to Leia, was the best time to give us her origin story. It was the best time to give us an explanation of like her backstory and why she's doing what she's doing. I think it would be kind of amazing if it turned out she was a spy, if it turned out that like she was working with the precursor to the Rebel Alliance as we know it in episode 4, feeding information to them, different things along those lines, and then like ultimately she's killed. My guess here is that the different leaks are right. She's going to turncoat. She's basically going to turn against the Empire. She's going to end up siding with the rebellion, but it'll be one of those things where like she turns back to the light side momentarily and then dies. It'll be something along those lines. I don't really know. I have no idea how that's going to go. I mean, there's a reason we haven't heard anything about her in any of the Star Wars properties that have come later on, right? Episode 4 or any of that stuff, Rogue One or what have you. You would think that if she was instrumental in the formation of the Rebel Alliance, we would have heard about her before this. So obviously she's going to die at the end of the show, regardless of what happens, whether she becomes a good guy, bad guy, or stays a bad guy or whatever the case is. The whole thing with Leia, again, I still think it's a pretty loose, and kind of a flimsy plot. Like, here comes Princess Leia getting herself in trouble yet again, the adventures of Leia. I think that Leia is an interesting character. I will say it kind of surprised me that Disney signed off on the potential torture of a kid. But if you guys follow things like the Fallen Order and stuff like that, that's not new to you, right? Like, those guys who aren't aware, the Empire, man, they got problems, dude. Like, there's no limit to the lengths they will go to get the information they want. Like, literally in Fallen Order, you end up finding out there's a point where like there's some younglings who escaped Coruscant who weren't killed by Anakin Skywalker, but they were ultimately tortured by the Empire and turned to the dark side, right? Like the story of Reva largely seems to be the same way, that she was most likely a youngling that was captured by the Empire and turned. And the reason why she hates the Jedi so much is because nobody ever came to save her. So she felt abandoned by them or something along those lines. But whatever the case is, right? Like, I'm kind of shocked that like they signed off on that on anything like outside of a video game, because video games in this day and age, you expect to be violent. You expect them to be like, not really hyper violent, but to have like some pretty adult themes. But when it comes to something like Disney Plus and Obi-Wan Kenobi, while Star Wars has not always been like the most G-rated thing, you can make a credible argument that Star Wars is pretty family-friendly for the most part. I mean, there's some darker themes there, and I wouldn't say that I would have like my 2-year-old or like 4-year-old watch Star Wars, but like a 7 or 8-year-old, sure. And so when you have something like that with like Princess Leia potentially being tortured, it's like, damn, that's pretty rough. One of the things I do like about that, though, is it does instill the fact that Leia's resolve, right? Like her fortitude didn't just come out of nowhere, right? It wasn't just like she inherited Padme's personality and she was always kind of like this and nothing bad ever happened to her. She just lived in some palatial estate, out there with the Organa family and enjoyed fine wines and political conversation that she can't relate to, even though she tries to appear to, because she's not really part of the people who are being oppressed. Just different things along those lines, right? But the cool thing about this is it's like, no, man, this girl's kind of been through some stuff, right? So now that it's giving us a little bit more than like the adventures of Leia and who knows what trouble she'll get into today. Like now that we're moving beyond that and we're getting into like some more serious themes with her character, I'm kind of digging the development, but I still say like trying to get Leia back home is just kind of a flimsy plot for the show. That being said, I can't really hold it against Disney for that. It's not the worst thing ever, right? It's just, I mean, how do you write a compelling series about Obi-Wan Kenobi? But I feel like at this point we're kind of looking more at like the general show as opposed to the episode itself. But that's one of the things that I've kind of noticed, that within each episode you just kind of get highlight moments, right? Like a big thing happens that's worth talking about, and like that's basically it. Beyond that, it's just kind of like some things take place. And maybe that's just due to the slow-going nature of the show. Maybe that's due to the fact that they just wanted to craft it in a way where it's essentially a slow burn. But the reality is, with Obi-Wan Kenobi in and of himself, I really wouldn't expect any less. I mean, this show, this episode right here, one of the things that I loved about it, and I don't know if it was just kind of me reading too much into it, or if it was something they were kind of going in the direction of, but like when he's in that tunnel and like they're surrounded by water on all sides, and like he's being shot at by the different stormtroopers and so on and so forth, it looked like his powers were kind of coming back to him, right? Like he was just sort of, I wouldn't say getting back to Obi-Wan Kenobi in like episode 3, right? Just like this ridiculously OP Jedi Master, right? Who would have just been child's play to deal with those stormtroopers in a tunnel, right? I mean, like, let's be honest with ourselves. If we're talking about like not really episode 1, he was still kind of figuring himself out, but like episode 2 or episode 3, Obi-Wan would have rolled right through those guys and wouldn't have even thought anything about it, right? He would have just been walking away with like the lightsaber behind his back, just blocking him, detecting where the laser beams are with the power of the Force, and like that would have been it, right? I mean, literally, it just would have been nothing at all. I loved here that it was almost kind of like, it seemed like his connection to the Force was growing stronger, that it was returning to him, and that makes sense because he's been using a little bit more of it as the show goes on, which is one of the things that I really enjoyed about this. It wasn't really one of these things where it was like, okay, so Leia's in danger, let's tap into the full might of the Force, right? It wasn't really anything like that. It was small callbacks, right? Like the little communicator being left on the console, right? Like a callback to Luke Skywalker and all those guys, from episode 4. But in that instance, when he like basically uses the Force to trick the stormtroopers into believing the sound's coming from somewhere else, small little things, right? Small little uses. And it's kind of funny because it feels like the Star Wars equivalent of Robert Loggia from Scarface, right? You guys remember that movie when he was talking to Tony Montana, Al Pacino, and Al Pacino was like, I'm gonna build the biggest drug empire ever, right? And Robert Loggia is like, no, the people who make it in this business are the ones who stay small. That's how Obi-Wan Kenobi really seems to kind of function, finding this balance between completely cutting himself off from the Force, but using the Force, just using it in small, subtle ways, just subtle enough that Darth Vader wouldn't be like, what was that? Oh my God, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, let's go get him, right? Versus putting himself in a situation to where there is no escape because he's not using the Force and he's inevitably going to die. So I think using small little things like that, kind of showing us this is how he becomes the Obi-Wan Kenobi that we're the most familiar with from episode 4, or at least those of us who started Star Wars with episodes 4, 5, and 6 before 1, 2, and 3 came out. I think this is a cool thing, kind of giving us this more subtle approach to the Force as opposed to like grandiose displays of it. Is it a good thing, a bad thing? I mean, I guess it's up to you, but I think it's a good thing. In all honesty, and maybe it's just me as the guy who got into Star Wars as a little kid with episodes 4, 5, and 6, and then I saw 1, 2, and 3 when I was in high school, when they came out, that for me, I kind of prefer the more subtle Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in all honesty, I kind of prefer more subtle uses of the Force. It is cool to see, right? Like, what is it, Starkiller in the trailer for The Force Unleashed, when he like rips down an entire Star Destroyer from the sky. I mean, stuff like that's cool. But like huge grandiose displays of use of the Force, easily overused, and they were easily overused in episodes 1, 2, and 3. 4, 5, and 6 had subtle stuff, right? Subtle little things. The most grandiose display of the use of the Force that you really saw in episodes 4, 5, and 6 was really like Yoda lifting the X-Wing out of the lake or out of the swamp on Dagobah, and then basically telling Luke Skywalker, you failed because you don't believe in yourself, home slice. That's why you don't get girls. So I prefer the more subtle approach to things, right? I prefer the more subtle approach to the use of the Force. Having said that, overall, this episode was cool. Wasn't really bored. There wasn't really a time where I was like, okay, so like when are we going to get to this thing? I didn't find myself fast forwarding. I mean, in episode 3, I kind of did. I'm not really gonna lie. It was by the 10-second increment. Like, you guys know how it is on Disney Plus, right? You get like the 10-second fast forward thing. I was using that, right, a couple times. Some of that was because I'm just impatient, and it is kind of a problem, not gonna lie. I swear to God, my impatience is gonna be my downfall one day. I've been working on it, but I was like, I really wanna see Darth Vader versus Obi-Wan. Don't lie, you felt the same way. Don't judge me. But nonetheless, right, it's one of those little things, right? Just one of those things. But the episode was great. I gotta say, with all of this, the character of Reva, this is kind of a main focus for me. I was really enjoying her in the beginning. She really is kind of wearing thin to a degree. That's why I say they really should have given us her origin story to kind of bring that interest back. Because at the moment right now, she kind of seems like a screw up, right? She seems pretty inept as like an inquisitor, right? Obviously, I mean, I think that's kind of the way her character is supposed to be. She's reckless, you know, she gets carried away. She basically leaps before she looks, that she is more in line with the emotional side of what it means to be a Sith, minus the logical side that's necessary in order to overcome somebody with the level of patience of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so to a degree, when she's like, well, I put a tracking device on their ship, so we'll ultimately find them. It almost to a degree kind of felt like the writers being like, oh God, we're making her look incompetent, aren't we? Okay. We need something to make her look like she knows what she's doing. Anybody have any ideas? I don't know. Have her put a tracking device, right? Kind of like a hand wavy answer, right? Have her put a tracking device on the thing and say that she meant to let them go the whole time. That's kind of how it feels to a degree, which is kind of disappointing because I love the character of Reva. Having said that, like, maybe that'll change, right? Maybe that'll shift around and we'll end up getting something a little more interesting regarding her character. But again, I haven't quite given up hope. I haven't given up faith on the character of Reva. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, where's this going? You know, that kind of a thing. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.